Committee. She's going to some other place a little north of us. I hear it's on a campus, some other building over there where they might do some important stuff too, called the Senate. And she is going to be going over to the Senate Banking Committee. And we deeply appreciate your service, Rachel. You've been a pleasure to work with. You've been an amazing professional, and how you have worked through some tough issues. And we just want to say thank you on behalf of myself personally, Sean, my team, and the entire committee. We just want to say thank you for your service. And we know you're not going far. Well, I'm sure our paths will be crossing again. So blessings and all the best to your future. And with that, I'm happy to acknowledge my colleague as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is one of those moments of bipartisanship. I'm honored to acknowledge the outstanding work and would wish her well as well. So thank you, Rachel, for your service.
And as a former staffer, I know you're only as good as the people you surround yourself with, and she's been excellent. So thank you again. With that, this hearing is entitled "Moving the Money, Part 2: Getting Answers from the Biden Administration on the Iranian Regime's Support of Terrorism." And without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials to the chair for inclusion in the record. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes to give an opening statement. So Assistant Secretary Rosenberg, Deputy Special Envoy Paley, thank you for appearing before our subcommittee this morning. Your testimony is significant to this subcommittee and continues to investigate how the Iranian regime accesses money around the world due to relaxed sanction enforcement and waivers. So additionally, we hope that you can shed light on why a new waiver was necessary for the Iraqi electricity sales and how the Biden administration monitors compliance of sanctions around the world. And as I said during our last hearing, I don't believe this topic should be partisan. However, I do believe in accountability. It is vital that our oversight work is informed with the collaboration and testimony directly from agencies in an open and transparent setting, not behind closed doors. So again, thank you for your willingness to be here today. As we documented in our previous hearing, Iran continues to be a leading state sponsor of terrorism, facilitating wide range of attacks and other illicit activities around the globe, and we are seeing these reports daily regarding our own troops in the region. October's attack on our ally Israel is a stark reminder that in order to prevent further atrocities, we must increase, not relax, pressure on the Iranian regime. Iran sanctions have been a significant component of U.S. policy since Iran's 1979 Islamic Revolution, and history tells us that they work. For example, the previous administration's maximum pressure campaign cut oil exports from Iran, significantly reducing Tehran's ability to fund attacks against Americans and our allies. In contrast, the current administration has adopted a different strategy. This past September, as part of a deal with the Iranian regime to get American hostages, President Biden waived U.S. sanctions to allow for the transfer of $6 billion of Iranian funds from accounts in South Korea to Qatar. While the funds were only to be used for humanitarian purposes, such as food and medicine, there are reports that the Iranian regime has found and exploited ways around those restrictions. Regardless of what the restrictions are placed on these transferred funds, Iranian officials themselves have signaled that this money is fungible, which is confirmed by the Iranian's president, Abram Raisi, who stated, quote, "This money belongs to the Iranian people, the Iranian government, so the Islamic Republic of Iran will decide what to do with this money," close quote. Believing that the money will go to benefit Iranian citizens may be a bit naive. The White House and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle may attempt to dismiss the significance of these waivers, assuring us that Iran will not gain access to these transferred funds. The reality is they likely will at some point if they haven't already. My colleagues will use this opportunity to point fingers at the past administration instead of acknowledging that under this president, Iran has gained ground and grown in their influence. I will note that the Obama administration, the Trump administration, all had been operating under this, but we saw a decrease in those sales, and that's what this whole program was about, to wean places like Korea off of Iranian oil. The American people expect their representatives in Washington to stand up to those who wish us harm. As we speak, Iranian proxies continue to attack American troops and our allies with little, if any, accountability or responsibility from this administration, in my opinion. So as chair of this subcommittee, I intend to use Congress's oversight authority to hold our government and the Biden administration accountable. The status quo is not acceptable. American lives have been lost. There's been 66 troops and contractors that have been killed in recent days. And I look forward to having an open and honest dialogue this morning. And with that, I'm going to yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you.
And the chair now recognizes the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Oversight, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, for his requested 4 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate greatly your desire for accountability. I respect greatly your desire to investigate fungibility. I do believe that President Biden is an honorable man. I believe that President Biden has followed the law. I believe that what he has done for humanitarian purposes is something that other presidents have done in a similar way. I believe that the $6 billion have not gone to, and I think we'll get evidence of that, to Iran. The money would never go to Iran. It would be utilized to make purchases for humanitarian purposes that could benefit people in Iran. I think that this quest for accountability is something that we should pursue. I don't think we should stop with just the second hearing, however. I think we need a third hearing. I think we need a third hearing because we need to take a look at the money that has gone to Hamas. The CNN news story. In 2018, Qatar, now Qatar is the same country that would aid and assist with the humanitarian support to the people in Iran. In 2018, Qatar began making monthly payments to the Gaza Strip. Some 15 million was sent into Gaza in cash-filled suitcases. Cash-filled suitcases. Now this is cash money going into the Gaza Strip, into the hands of Hamas. This was delivered by the Qataris through Israeli territory after months of negotiation with Israel. Now, what is interesting about this is, in doing this, $15 million, and by the way, when I say dollars, I literally mean dollars, US dollars, not Canadian dollars. In doing this, the US was aware of the Qatari payments, and this was on President Trump's watch, to Hamas. This is per a former senior State Department official. And also, this allowed Prime Minister Netanyahu to avoid the pressure of peace talks because he could indirectly keep Hamas in power. And in so doing, he would have the perfect enemy, the perfect scapegoat, somebody that does not want Israel to exist. And as a result of not wanting Israel to exist, he could always say, I don't have a partner to negotiate with. But while he's saying this, he is allowing millions in cash. We don't have to talk about fungibility. Millions in cash to go directly to Hamas. I think that we ought to investigate Mr. Trump's actions or the administration's action. I don't think we can limit these things to the lawful actions of President Biden. This is more than probable cause to investigate. I would hope, Mr. Chairman, that we would treat the Trump administration with a similar desire to have accountability and find out what happened to that cash, suitcases of cash. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and I will note that I believe Ms. Rosenberg, and I'm not sure about Mr. Paley, but are career employees, correct? No, I had it reversed. Okay, Mr. Paley is, so you may have that ability to ask them that. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Ms. Waters, for a minute for an opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Green. Under the Biden administration, the United States has maintained the most extensive set of comprehensive sanctions on Iran. In fact, the Biden administration has ramped up pressure significantly since the Trump administration by designing sanctions for hundreds of additional entities for activity related to Iran, including illicit sale of Iranian oil. Further, President Biden successfully negotiated a temporary ceasefire and the return of hostages taken by Hamas. This is the kind of steady leadership that America needs in an increasingly unsteady world. While I'm interested in working across the aisle with the administration to ratchet up pressure against Iran in any way possible, the accusations that the Biden administration has somehow weakened sanctions against Iran are simply false and are not conducive to productive conversation on these issues. I hope we can clear up much of that misinformation, and I thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. So today we welcome the testimony of Elizabeth Rosenberg. Assistant Secretary Rosenberg is the Assistant Secretary for Terrorist Financing and Financial Crimes. Mr. Abram Paley is the Deputy Special Envoy to Iran, and we want to thank you for taking the time to be here in person today, and without objection, your written statements will be made as part of our permanent record. So Assistant Secretary Rosenberg, you are now recognized for 5 minutes for your oral remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Hazenga, Ranking Member Green, and distinguished members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on what the U.S. Department of the Treasury is doing to combat terrorist financing. October 7th was a day of horror. The brutality of the terrorist attacks carried out by Hamas against Israel, killing indiscriminately, sparing neither children nor the elderly, was an affront to our shared humanity and a somber reminder of the threat posed by terrorist organizations like Hamas. It is my responsibility as the Assistant Secretary for Terrorist Financing and Financial Crimes to identify and disrupt terrorist financing in the United States and abroad. Since the attacks, Treasury has redoubled its effort to identify and freeze the finances of Hamas and other Iran-backed terrorist groups. Hamas has traditionally been able to raise funds for its terrorist activities from an array of sources, including taxation, donations, a portfolio of investments across Africa and the Middle East, and direct support from Iran. The U.S. Treasury Department has historically used the full scope of its authorities to impede Hamas's funding. Sanctions designations of the group's leaders and investments span over 2 decades. Recognizing the dangerous role that Iran plays in destabilizing the region more broadly, Treasury has sanctioned nearly 1,000 individuals and entities connected to the Iranian regime and its proxies to date. Since the October attacks, Treasury has released 3 separate sanctions tranches focused on Hamas, designating over 50 additional individuals and entities linked to Hamas in Iran across multiple jurisdictions. And today, just this morning, Treasury has announced another tranche of sanctions on Hamas entities in connection with international partners. However, Hamas leaders live and move freely in Turkey, Qatar, and elsewhere, publicly solicit funds, and enjoy financial services. Therefore, in addition to sanctions designations, disrupting Hamas's international financial networks requires international action. In the wake of the Hamas attacks, Treasury reached out to counterparts across the Middle East and Europe to convey the administration's support for Israel and the intent to use all the tools at our disposal to expose and disrupt Hamas, including the Terrorist Financing Targeting Center, which we promptly convened among a number of Gulf partners in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, in October. Additionally, Treasury Undersecretary Nelson recently traveled to Turkey to discuss the urgent need for Turkish efforts to freeze Hamas funds. Deputy Secretary Adeyemo also spoke with his European counterparts in late October to press partners to investigate entities with possible ties to Hamas. Treasury has also had substantive technical outreach to our partners around the world, which has led to complementary sanctions actions by Australia, the European Union, Japan, the United Kingdom, and others to designate Hamas-related targets through their own domestic authorities. Treasury has also engaged the private sector, both in the United States and abroad, to refine the red flags and indicators of terrorist financing and underscore the imperative to report and freeze terrorist funds. Alongside these counter-illicit finance activities, Treasury has a significant role to play in addressing the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza to ensure that our financial measures do not negatively impact legitimate aid going to the people of Gaza. Treasury has had close engagement with representatives of non-governmental organizations, international organizations, and U.S. government implementers of humanitarian assistance on these matters. In sum, Treasury's response to Hamas and its funders over decades has been broad and aggressive. As this committee fully appreciates, Hamas's attacks and their relationship with Iran pose a threat to the safety and stability not only of Israel, but to the region more broadly and to American interests. All of us here share a common interest: preventing acts of terror. Secretary Yellen and Deputy Secretary Adeyemo have previously spoken about how to confront these challenges by maintaining U.S. leadership abroad, meeting all our financial commitments, and adapting our laws to meet the challenges posed by new and emerging financial technologies. I look forward to working with the members of this committee on these issues, and I'd be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we will turn to Mr. Paley. You are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Huizenga, Ranking Member Green, members of the committee, thank you for inviting us here today. We welcome this opportunity to discuss Iran, one of the most persistent threats we face as a country. The Biden administration views Iran as an adversary and the leading state sponsor of terrorism. We are clear-eyed about Iran and will continue to take the actions necessary to counter the threats it poses, and our approach is framed within this context. Across the federal government, we are confronting Iran and pushing back against its destabilizing activities. We are coordinating closely with allies and partners to enhance our already strong military deterrent. We are implementing biting sanctions and economic pressure, and we are utilizing strategic messaging to make clear Iran's behavior will not be tolerated, will be punished, and that Tehran will continue to be treated as a pariah on the international stage, absent a shift in its policies. This resolve in countering Iran has been on full display since the horrific Hamas terrorist attacks on Israel on October 7th, the subsequent attacks by Iranian-backed proxies on U.S. personnel and facilities in the region, and the Iran-enabled Houthi attacks on Israel and on commercial shipping in the Red Sea. We view Iran as complicit in Hamas's barbaric terrorist attack and the attacks against us by its proxies, and we will continue to hold it accountable. The President and the Secretary of State have been unequivocal about our support for Israel and Israel's right to defend itself against terrorism. And the Biden administration has also been consistent in our efforts to counter Iran's long-standing support for Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and militia groups in Iraq and Syria. Our bolstered presence in the region has sent a clear message that this is not a time to take advantage of the situation. And President Biden has shown he is prepared to defend U.S. personnel and interests time and time again. While our priority right now remains supporting Israel, countering Iran's support for terrorism in the region, and addressing the humanitarian situation in Gaza, we also continue to counter the full range of the Iranian regime's activities that are antithetical to our interests and our values. We are confronting the Iranian regime's lethal plotting against current and former U.S. officials, as well as the transnational repression of dissidents, journalists, and human rights defenders, including on U.S. soil. We are using all of the tools at our disposal to expose and disrupt Iran's expanding military partnership with Russia, alongside our allies and partners. We are standing with the people of Iran in the face of continued oppression and violence. And on the nuclear front, President Biden is absolutely committed to never allowing Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon and has been clear that we remain postured and prepared to use all appropriate measures to do so. Iran's unjust detention of our citizens for political leverage also represents a threat, and that is why we continue to stress to all Americans, do not go to Iran. President Biden and Secretary Blinken have been clear there is no higher priority than the safety and security of Americans, and the administration stands by our deal that brought 5 innocent Americans and 2 of their family members home. This deal was about reuniting these Americans with their loved ones. As part of this arrangement, we facilitated the transfer of $6 billion in restricted Iranian funds held in South Korea to restricted accounts in Qatar for humanitarian use only. Not a penny of this money has been spent, and these funds will not go anywhere anytime soon. This does not change anything about our approach to Iran. Iran remains an adversary, and we will continue to confront it as such. With respect to Qatar, its relationship with Hamas has been well known to multiple Israeli governments, including the current government going back many years. It has been and remains extremely helpful in securing hostage releases. At the same time, we have discussed with Qatari leaders that there is no going back to the status quo of October 6th, and they have expressed their agreement with that. With respect to the waiver Secretary Blinken signed on November 14th, the 21st such waiver across multiple administrations for Iraq to pay for electricity imports and in support of Iraq's energy independence. Under these waivers, no money has been or will be permitted to enter Iran, and any notion to the contrary is false. These Iranian funds can only be used for the purchase of food, agricultural commodities, medicine, medical devices, and other non-sanctionable transactions. We do not believe that restricting the availability of humanitarian goods to the Iranian people would decrease Iran's support for terrorism. Iran has proven it prioritizes destabilizing activities and terrorism regardless of the country's macroeconomic conditions. And since we do not expect any change in Iran's behavior from these steps, our approach to Iran is similarly not going to change. And so I close by reaffirming the administration's commitment to addressing Iran's continued destabilizing behavior unilaterally and with our partners. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And before I get into my questions, I want to emphasize as well, the U.S. citizens that still go to Iran is stunning to me. Recently, I had the Swiss ambassador to Iran in my office. She and the Swiss act as our on-the-ground liaison since we do not have diplomatic relations. They know of tens of thousands of our citizens who are there, and they suspect that it may be more. So if anything, if we want to talk about bipartisan agreement, please do not go to Iran. And so we, the government, and we as citizens aren't ever put in that situation. So I wanted to emphasize that is a public service announcement from the Oversight Committee, if that's okay with the ranking member. So I'm going to start with my questions with Assistant Secretary Rosenberg. What is the Biden administration's policy reason for allowing the transfer of money from Iraqi banks to Iraqi dinar, in Iraqi dinar, to France, Germany, Italy, and Oman, the last 2 waivers that covered those, and to be then converted from dinar to euros? Basically, what I'm wanting to know is the why, and then secondarily, who requested this move? So, Secretary.
Thank you very much for the question. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this. As a point of clarification, the money was earned in euros, so it never changed. There was never a FX transaction. It was earned in euros. And
what do you mean by earned in euros? I mean, this was electricity that was sent from Iran to Iraq. The Iraqis paid for it in euros?
That's correct.
So it was never in Iraqi dinar?
That's correct.
Okay, and it's my understanding, though, that the law says that it is meant and intended to be in the local denomination.
I will defer to my colleague from the State Department to discuss the waivers that were put in place originally by the last administration that allow for Iraq to purchase energy from Iran.
So they haven't been converted to euros because they were in euros, is your testimony?
Yes.
Okay. And why is that necessary?
It's necessary. It's the Iraqis have the opportunity to pay for that in either dinar or euros, and they paid for it in euros.
All right. As we've discussed, Oman is one of the countries. So the money that's, whether it's in Italy, France, or was in Germany, or is in Oman, is in euros, is your understanding?
It's in euros.
Okay. Why is Oman one of the countries granted a waiver to receive Iranian funds from Iraq? Why Oman?
We have worked with the financial institutions in Oman to create the structure for restrictions on these finances.
Do you have greater confidence in the Omani banking system than you do in the Qatari banking system, or the Italian banking system, or the French banking system?
Speaking specifically to the funds in question, I think that we're here today to discuss, so funds in Qatar and funds in Oman. We've worked very carefully with...
But the waiver says Italy and France twice, the last two waivers, and Germany. I'm curious why Germany is no longer in that waiver, and maybe Mr. Paley is going to have to answer that, but I want to continue with you.
I'd happily defer, since these are State Department waivers, so I'd happily defer to my colleague to speak to the text of the waiver.
Okay.
But with respect to the confidence that we have in the financial institutions in Qatar and in Oman that hold this money, we've worked on creating a structure for the restriction of these funds and a whole series of levels of compliance in order to examine the money and any potential requests for transfer.
And we had
that may-
testimony previously that there's no written agreement on that. There is no letter, but there is a letter, but not a written agreement. But have there been any humanitarian transactions facilitated from the Iranian funds held in Oman?
There have been 2 transactions.
2 transactions, okay. I know Mr. Paley had said there had been none out of Qatar, but there have been out of Oman. Have there been any issues or problems identified in the transactions facilitated from the Iranian funds held in Oman?
I'm familiar with the request from the chair regarding some matters related to the financial institutions. We have prepared a response to that, and that will be forthcoming, I believe, today. It would be inappropriate for me to speak in an open setting here about the financial institutions in detail, although we'd be happy to, in a closed setting, speak more about that particular matter.
So this is yes or no. You're not giving us any information. Have there been problems or issues with those transfers?
The transactions themselves, we have confidence in the series of restrictions that we have in place and the due diligence around
Okay,
the request.
Ms. Rosenberg, you're sliding into bureaucrat speak now. I mean, you're going soft around the edges on this. It's a simple question. Now, your answer can be what I interpret is I can't answer it in this open setting, but have there been problems?
I appreciate the question, and we would be happy to, in a closed setting, speak to you more about the particular transactions.
So we will take that as a yes. And all right, so my time has expired. I will, with that, I'm going to recognize at the request of the ranking member of the subcommittee, the full committee ranking member, the gentlewoman from California.
Thank you very much, Mr. Paley and Ms. Rosenberg. The United States had a long-standing bipartisan policy to explicitly exclude certain humanitarian activities from sanctions restrictions. Specifically, humanitarian exceptions allow for trade in agricultural commodities, medicine, and medical devices. Such exceptions are reflected in legislation and executive orders that form the United States sanctions programs, including those related to Iran. These humanitarian exceptions reflect basic respect for all human life, and they are also important to our broader national security interests. Right now, there's a very serious humanitarian crisis occurring in Gaza, and although the Biden administration was able to successfully negotiate a temporary ceasefire to allow for more humanitarian assistance, much more is needed. Mr. Paley, Ms. Rosenberg, Can you discuss the importance of humanitarian exceptions in the context of what is happening in Gaza and U.S. strategic interests in the broader region? What would an elimination of humanitarian exceptions to sanctions and what that would mean for the innocent civilians in Gaza?
Thank you very much for the question. It is correct that the ability to, the exceptions that exist to pay for agricultural commodities, medicine, and medical devices are a matter of longstanding policy. They are enshrined in congressional statute over years, over many programs, over successive Congresses. They are enshrined in executive authority as well, over a variety of administrations. And as you say, it reflects respect for human life. It respects core values of Congress, of the administration, about providing for meeting basic human needs. These exceptions that exist, the ability to pay for humanitarian goods, apply across an array of sanctions programs. And so to the extent that where there is a need, so for example, you were noting in Gaza, our exceptions exist there as well, which is to say that sanctions should not be, and we will work so that they cannot be here, restrictions on the provision of humanitarian assistance there as elsewhere. One note I would add, given that we're here to discuss Iran and its support for terror, including through proxy groups in the region, and our concern about the potential for diversion of humanitarian aid, it creates the necessity for us to work diligently to ensure that humanitarian aid is in a number of circumstances restricted, and we have great clarity on the fact that it shall be used for humanitarian aid and not diverted.
Thank you, Mr. Paley.
Thank you very much. I would reiterate what Assistant Secretary Rosenberg said in terms of this administration's commitment of support on humanitarian issues, which echoes support across multiple administrations for addressing humanitarian issues and also having these humanitarian carve-outs in our legislation that allow for with the proper due diligence, humanitarian transaction to go to people across the world, including in areas where we have very strong disagreements about their policy approaches. Since October 7th, President Biden and Secretary Blinken have emphasized their support for Israel and Israel's right to defend themselves, including against Iranian-backed terrorism. At the same time, President Biden and Secretary Blinken have also emphasized their focus on humanitarian support to Gaza.
Thank you. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle have alleged that President Biden has weakened Iran sanctions, but my understanding is that President Biden has only increased sanctions since the Trump administration. In fact, the two transactions waivers that are the focus of this hearing are actually carried over from the Trump administration. Can you please confirm that these are the same sanctions waivers from the Trump administration that have been continued by the Biden administration? Is that true?
Thank you very much. Yes, in terms of the waiver with regards to Iraq and Iraq's purchases of electricity from Iran, this is the 21st time that this waiver has been issued, the 20th renewal across administrations. So this administration has been very clear about our support for Iraq, and that's what this waiver is about. I'm happy to get into more detail. And as Ms. Rosenberg said, our
time has
support
expired.
for, excuse me.
I'll let you finish the sentence, but the gentlelady's time has expired.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Go back.
With that, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Sessions, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. What's happening today is that this subcommittee, under the leadership of our young chairman, is trying to ask questions because, as you know, as required by law, there's a report that was issued to Congress. There was only one sentence in the report regarding the payment transfer of authority in the most recent November Iraqi electric waiver. So I've got a copy of your statement here, and the statement says the Secretary also certifies that France, Italy, and Oman faced exceptional circumstances preventing them from significantly reducing their petroleum products purchases from Iran. Well, look, I get it with France, but Italy has reserves of 1.3% of what it already uses. I don't know what the exceptional and significant is there. Oman has proven reserves of 79.4 times its annual consumption. And yet this secretary has chosen to fool the United States Congress into believing significant and exceptional, rather than providing the data and information. So the problem is that we've been around for a while, and remember that the Obama administration 5 different times argued the case they could only give Iran cash, billions of dollars, and the only way they could do it is in cash. Well, we know that you can't follow the cash. We don't know where that went. The Obama administration argued, oh, but we're for the Israelis, but kept giving billions of dollars to cash. Hamas only has about $500 million a year, and yet these administrations from, granted, the Democratic side, give billions of dollars cash to the Iranians, where it's just slush money. Just go give it out. There's no way to follow the money. Mr. Paley, there was no explanation in this report as to why it necessitated the payment transfers. I gave you 2 minutes. Gentlemen, I'd like for him to answer the question of what should have been in here in this report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Congressman, and thank you for the opportunity to
I'm
discuss
sure
this
you're delighted with it.
We welcome the opportunity because at the heart of it, what this waiver is about is our support for Iraq. Across administrations, we have issued and renewed these waivers.
Then why did you blame Oman and exceptional circumstances and significant? Why did you use those terms for someone that has 79 times what their annual needs are?
Thanks very much for the question. So over time, multiple administrations have approved and renewed these waivers to allow Iraq to continue to purchase electricity from Iran. Over time, money has accrued in these accounts that are in Iraq and that are subject to all of the restrictions that have remained in place because we have not lifted any sanctions against Iran. Over time, as this money has accrued, Iran has sought to use this as a point of leverage over Iraq and pressured Iraq to release this money, to give it back in certain ways, and Iraq has stood firm. So we, with this waiver and with the previous waiver, have sought to stand firm with Iraq as it continues to improve its energy independence, but work with Iraq to get these Iranian funds out of the restricted accounts in Iraq, where Iran is able to leverage Iraq to release this money or transfer it in a way that would potentially not be subject to all of the restrictions that are in place.
Mr. Paley, I think your use of terms and hiding, in my opinion, behind this need for humanitarian and to support Iraq and all these things, we are dealing with America's greatest terror, and that is the Iranians, and you're giving them cash. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. With that, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Garcia, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the witnesses' presence today. And I echo many of the comments made by some of my colleagues in condemning the rise of anti-Semitism Islamophobia, and the hate in all forms here in the United States and abroad. Everyone in this room and across the world saw the gruesome images and heard the heartbreaking stories of those impacted by the October 7th attack on Israel by Hamas. Attacks like these reinforce that the United States must maintain its steady global leadership abroad and has only strengthened during the Biden administration. Terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah are financed by Iran. There's no question about that, making U.S. sanctions on Iran critically important. We heard testimony today that places focus on 2 sanctions waivers granted by the United States earlier this year. So I want to inquire specifically further about the $6 billion in Iranian funds transferred from South Korean banks to Qatar. Ms. Rosenberg, Secretary Wally Adeyemo told Congress that the U.S. and Qatar have agreed to effectively block the funds and that on a case-by-case applications, the money would be spent under the current arrangement will be denied for foreseeable future. Could you provide specific examples of oversight mechanisms in place where the humanitarian channels are in place to prevent any funds from being used for terrorist financing? I know that I think Mr. Paley said that not one penny has been spent.
Thank you for the question. It is the case that there have been no transfers out of this from the $6 billion sum held in Qatari financial institutions. So I'll offer an explanation of the measures in place to prevent the diversion to non-humanitarian purposes. There's, I think, 3 levels of controls on this restricted fund. So in the first instance, the financial institutions themselves apply their own know your customer and due diligence requirements for the funds. In certain instances, they have adopted a policy to pre-vet potential recipients of funds. These would be firms engaged in agricultural activity, medicine, and medical device supply companies, for example. So they've also, these firms, the financial institutions have also adopted a policy of only letting existing account holders be in the position to receive the funds, which is to say those that have already been onboarded and vetted for customer awareness. So that's one level, is the intensive and enhanced due diligence at the financial institutions. On top of that comes the restrictions from the European Union. So these are the kinds of controls, know your customer and anti-money laundering controls, incumbent upon institutions that operate within the EU. This is because, as noted previously in questions with the chair, the funds are in euros, which means that there's a necessity to, when clearing euro transactions, be in line with European policies on anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism. So a second layer of controls has to do with European standards. A third level of controls has to do with the United States and the restrictions that we and the Treasury Department places on these accounts, on these restricted funds. I will note that there's no U.S. nexus to these funds, nor has there been at any point. Nevertheless, we have imposed our own restrictions on these accounts in these institutions, and these Qatari institutions, and this involves our own anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism restrictions. It requires the financial institutions to notify the U.S. Treasury Department whenever they seek to engage in any transfer. And back to your original point, no transfers have so far occurred.
No transfers have occurred.
That's correct.
And Mr. Paley, are you concur or have anything to add to Ms. Rosenberg's response?
I concur with her response. Thank you.
All right. And you said earlier that not one penny has been spent.
That's correct.
Not one penny.
Correct.
I think it's worth repeating because that seems to be a point that some don't seem to hear, and I want to make sure that the public heard that not one penny has been spent.
Exactly. Not one penny has been spent from
All
those
right, well,
funds.
thank you, and I see my time's running out. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. With that, the Vice Chairman of the committee, Mr. Rose from Tennessee, is acknowledged for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being with us today. Mr. Paley, how has the placing of U.S. Special Envoy to Iran, Robert Malley, on unpaid leave affected your office's ability to effectively function?
Thanks very much for the question. So as the Deputy Special Envoy for Iran at the State Department, I'm in charge of the day-to-day implementation of our Iran policy at the department, and nothing has changed in terms of our implementation of that policy. We work across the department and across the interagency to continue to advance President Biden and Secretary Blinken's focus on countering Iran, which remains a top adversary and state sponsor of terrorism.
Can you provide any clarity as to why Mr. Malley's security clearance was suspended?
Unfortunately, I'm not in a position today to speak to personnel or security clearance issues.
Is that something that perhaps you all could answer in a classified setting?
I know that the department is engaged with this committee and other committees on certain issues related to this case, but today, again, I'm not in a position to speak to security clearance
If it's
issues.
possible to get more clarity on that in that setting, we'd certainly appreciate it. I would.
We will certainly take the question back. Thank you.
All right. In September, the Department of Treasury established what it called a humanitarian channel in Qatar. I think we're all familiar with that action to administer $6 billion in Iranian assets from South Korea. It is described as a way to, quote, further facilitate the flow of humanitarian assistance to the people of Iran. Assistant Secretary Rosenberg, why did Treasury decide to create a quote, humanitarian, unquote, channel as, and is this a common mechanism for Treasury?
Thank you for the question. As to the why, I'd be very happy to defer to my State Department colleague, given that the creation of this particular mechanism was pursuant to a deal on the exchange of detainees between Iran and the United States. I will defer on that. With regard to, is this common practice? Is there precedent for this? In the last administration, there was an effort to establish there was an establishment of a Swiss humanitarian channel to pursue the same goal, which is to say to take Iranian funds, highly restricted, and that could be used only for humanitarian purposes, subject to intense vetting, akin to what I had just described in the prior questioning. So there is precedent for this. This is another example that builds on lessons learned and is in a different jurisdiction.
So practically, and I'll let Mr. Paley, I'll let you clarify as well, but is there a stark difference between a humanitarian channel and other escrow accounts that are available to Iran for humanitarian trade purposes? And either one of you.
I can answer that. So it is the case that there's special conditions around a humanitarian channel understood as such, which is to say the establishment of such a channel is exclusively for, is designed and established exclusively for humanitarian payments. And as I was noting before, it can be the case that certain potential recipients of the funds are pre-vetted. They can only be customers of an institution. It's designed for that purpose. Generally speaking, the U.S. law, policy, and sanctions allow for payments, Iran, as well as for other countries subject to intensive sanctions and other programs, to be able to pay for humanitarian transactions. But this is a particularized channel established with conditionality around it, even though it could be permitted to pay for humanitarian goods in a different account, but subject to that would not be an account established exclusively for humanitarian purposes.
And give us some greater sense of what data Treasury is relying on to ensure that the humanitarian channels are the most effective way to get the appropriate assistance to Iranian citizens. How are you measuring that? What What's the data source that you use to measure that effectively?
That's an interesting question. I would offer that our highest purpose here is to, and the purpose that guides our policy overall is to ensure that Iran does not have access to money it can use for terror and destabilization. And so
Our time has expired, but I would appreciate it if you might expand on that for the record. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. With that, the ranking member from Texas, Mr. Green, is recognized for 5 minutes.
I reserve and ask that you go to the next member that's available for questioning.
We're sorry, Mr. Green, we're going to have you, will be our last. This is our last. So it is, unless we are willing to do a second round, which I'm happy to do. I know there's more questions.
Mr. Chair, I would refer you to the committee rules, and I'll quote, "The chair shall, so far as practicable, defer to the ranking member with respect to the order of recognition for minority members. I have no additional minority members, and I reserve, and I ask that you go to a member who is prepared to speak on your side."
Happy to engage in this conversation about our rules. You have control of your side of the aisle. If you don't have any more members, you are the last one, so therefore it's your turn. I have more members on my side, and that's the discretion of the chair. So I'm not doing anything funky with the rules. It's your turn. So I know you'd like to have the last word, but that's not how this works. We have more members over on this side. The majority is going to get the last word. So the gentleman can bypass his ability to have a question. I'm happy to go to a second round of questioning, because I know I certainly have more questions. So does the gentleman agree to a second round?
The gentleman would ask that the chair adhere to the rules, and in so doing, respect my right to pass. And I appreciate your highly technical terminology of funky, but this is, in my opinion, something that is appropriate under the rules.
The gentleman,
I reserve.
the gentleman will understand that I am adhering to the rules, which is you get to determine. You had the ranking member go first. You always nicely defer to your members and always go last on your side of the aisle. If we are ending this hearing, it is the majority's not only right, but because we have enough people over here, as we alternate, the gentleman from Pennsylvania is going to go last. So it is the ranking member's choice as to whether he wants to claim his 5-minute time. We have deferred to the ranking member on his side. We have given him the ability to choose to have the full ranking member. Hold on. Please tell me that you recognize how foolish and childish this is.
Well,
So,
I recognize,
no, sir.
excuse me, allow me to respond to that it was not necessary for you to use the term foolish and childish.
Okay, so the
It was
chair
not.
shall,
I
so
have been
far as
very hold on just a
practicable-
moment. I've been very respectful of you. Now you will respect me. Respect me if you don't respect the rules.
Gentleman knows I have full respect
Well,
for
then,
him.
foolish
which
and
is-
childish is not the way
I
to
was
address a
actually-
member of Congress.
Excuse me, sir, I was actually referring to the staff behind us that was interrupting our proceedings. So,
Well, I would
with that,
defend the staff. I don't think you refer to the staff as foolish.
actually, I did as I turned
Well,
around
you can
looking
do
at
it,
your staff
but
and our
I
staff.
would say to you that that's inappropriate
Okay.
for a member of
So,
Congress.
would the
to refer
gentleman like to
staff.
proceed, or would you like to
The
continue to argue
member,
about the
the
process?
gentleman, the member, I reserve.
So the gentleman, just to be clear, the ruling of the chair will be that the gentleman is forfeiting his 5 minutes. The gentleman from Pennsylvania will be recognized, and that will be the end of the hearing. That is your choice.
I appeal the ruling of the chair.
That is your choice.
I appeal the ruling of
If
the chair.
I haven't done anything yet, I'm giving you your options, or we can continue on with a second round. I'm happy to then go back, if you would like to get the ranking member, or Ms. Garcia, or any of your other members here, happy to do that. But either I'm going to recognize you for your 5 minutes, or I'm going to recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania for 5 minutes, and when the gentleman from Pennsylvania is done, the hearing is done.
So
What is your choice, sir?
May I ask you a question? Would you be so kind as to receive a question as chair?
Absolutely.
So what your contention is that the gentleman from Pennsylvania will be the very last person?
Unless we have more members on our side or your side show up.
Would you hold for a moment, please? Would you?
Happy to. So you do realize this is going to go to a full committee? All right, for the fine folks on C-SPAN that are riveted by what has been going on with the discussion of our committee rules, tradition is that we alternate majority to minority. The majority always starts, the majority always closes. That request has been to be changed. I have an understanding with the ranking member now that we will be, at his request, running through the rest of our committee members, the Republican committee members. He will then claim the last 5 minutes of questioning, at which point I will grant him an extended time for a closing remark, at which point then I will have that same amount of time for my closing remarks to end the hearing. So, after lots of back and forth, it is now the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Muser, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Paley, do you think the $6 billion and Ms. Rosenberg will be only used for humanitarian purposes? You pretty much stated that, right? Even though the Iranian President Raisi said they will use it for whatever they want, whenever we need it. Do you not believe, is the Iranian president not to be trusted in his words?
I would certainly not believe everything that the Iranian president says.
Okay, so the Iranian president should not be believed in this case, or do you just pick and choose when you believe him and don't believe him?
We don't trust the Iranians. We view them as an adversary and a
Okay, so
state-sponsored
why do you
terrorist.
think then that the aid would not be used for other purposes? Do you understand what the term fungible means? You probably do. You're pretty educated, right? You know what fungible means? Okay, so if Iran has $50 million and they get $50 million, and they were going to use that $50 million for food, and then they get a new $50 million, they can use the new $50 million for food and use the old $50 million to buy weapons for terrorists. You get that, right, sir? So why don't you think that's going to happen if you don't trust them?
Thanks very much for the question. So I have full confidence in the due diligence measures that Assistant Secretary Rosenberg has outlined for this money. It can only be used for
You know, there's an
humanitarian
expression up by me, you know, there's a bridge in Brooklyn that I'd like to show you and see if you're interested in. That's just absurd, and I think you know it. And in your memoirs, you'll probably write it that way. What about the $10 billion from Iraq? That's not fungible either. That will be highly monitored, and we'll watch where every penny goes.
So in terms of the due diligence, both of these sets of funds can only be used for humanitarian transactions,
Sure.
and we
In
have a
words.
great deal
In
of...
theory, in weak theory, against a regime that we don't trust, that we know is bombing Americans' forces and as we speak. $6 billion, you say, no, we love saying not one penny, not one penny, not one penny. Okay, is that permanent? Is that permanent, that not one penny of that $6 billion will go to Iran?
As we've said, we do not expect this money to go anywhere anytime
Okay,
soon.
so, but can you guarantee me it's not permanent? It is permanent?
What we've said, and this is based on U.S. law,
So it's not. So really, we should have said yet, not one penny yet has gone to the Iranian terrorist regime. That's more of a correct statement. Are the sanctions in Iran, we're stating that the sanctions in Iran now are stronger than during the previous administration, even though Iran's reserves went from $4 billion to God knows where, $80 billion. Even though that is a fact, you're going to sit there and tell me that, tell us, tell the world, that the sanctions today are stronger than they were under the previous administration, even though there's been a reversal of fortune.
So this administration, we have not lifted any sanctions against Iran, and in fact, we have actually rolled
You haven't
out
enforced the sanctions,
countless numbers of sanctions, Mr.
Is it true that the amount of oil exported from Iran is nearly 10 times what it was 4 years ago?
We continue to closely monitor oil exports.
I'm asking you a question.
That's
Is
a
it true or
concern that we
false?
have.
Is it true that the amount of oil being exported from Iran is nearly 10 times more than it was 4 years ago?
The oil exports,
Even though you didn't change the sanctions.
Mr. Chairman.
Is that true?
Mr. Congressman, the oil exports from Iran have fluctuated over time. There are a variety of reasons for that, but what does remain in place is all of our sanctions, which we continue to enforce.
But the sanctions aren't working. clearly. In fact, they're 1/10 what they were before in enforcement. The International Atomic Energy Agency found many violations, okay, I was there, of the uranium enrichment taking place in Iran. Many violations. Can Iran be trusted to abide by those so-called rules that are trying to be worked out with the Biden administration with no surprise inspections in place?
Thanks for the question. So the Biden administration has been clear that we will never let Iran get a nuclear weapon. One of the things that we have done is continue to encourage our partners and allies to press Iran to cooperate more fully with the IAEA. We engage regularly with the IAEA, and this is one of our top priorities.
I hope so. Do you agree that Iran is the primary supporter of terrorism and supporting the #1 supporter of Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and behind the nearly 100 attacks on American forces in the last 2 months?
We have minced no words about our concerns about Iran's support for terrorist groups.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired, and per the ranking member's request, we will once again go to a Republican member on this side. The gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Nunn, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation. I know everyone in this room is committed to protecting the United States, and I appreciate your public service and the bipartisan work on this committee to hold Iran accountable. There is work that needs to continue here, and this is one of the reasons we're in the Financial Services Committee today, because on October 7th, the attack on Israel was one of the most heinous elements that we've seen, and we can all agree that Iran was one of the primary funders for this attack to occur by Hamas. Challengingly, the United States has stalled in freezing Iran assets, though. The $6 billion in illegal oil sales, we have been good on this committee, and I'm proud to lead the commitment that we will never transfer that money to Iran. However, they are continuing to move an unprecedented amount of oil out of the country for sale through a ghost armada. We've been briefed on this in both the classified setting and the public setting, so today we'll talk at the unclassed level, but we understand that this amount of new funding, over $80 billion, or to put that in another term, 400% increase since these tough sanctions we've talked about, has actually increased. And it's precipitated a number of threats to the region, not just to Israel, but to our own forces right in the Middle East, areas where I have flown multiple combat operations out of, have received over 100 attacks, has been highlighted today in just the last weeks alone. And during my time as a counterintelligence officer, I personally witnessed the shady tactics of the Iranian regime and their work to combat U.S. interests in the region as well as our allies by undermining them through nefarious relationships with Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthi rebels, and ultimately through the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps. So let's get started. I want to talk to you, Ms. Rosenberg. Talk to us about, first of all, how the Iranians are getting, you work on Treasury, how they're able to get oil out of Iran through these sanctions using ships that fly under false flag.
Thank you very much for the question. Iran uses a variety of methods in order to try and earn money. I appreciate
Talk to me specifically about the ships. Let's get to it.
Using obscured means, front companies, a network of individuals who are not who they say they are. They look to flag registries and insurance providers that don't look
That's an interesting point, particularly on the insurance providers. What has Treasury done to clamp down on these ships? Because ultimately, while they fly under false flags, the insurance companies ultimately are the ones where you have the ability to help stop this. What have you done to stop the insurance providers?
If they have any touch point to U.S. jurisdiction, we have opportunities.
Great. How many have we shut down?
The issue that you're getting at here is that Iran looks to fly-by-night providers that would seriously concern all of us in terms of their ability to pay out if there's a spill or any security situation.
I would agree.
Yes.
So have we identified any of the insurance providers and taken action?
Iran uses its own insurance provision here, which is
40% of the fleet, as we understand through the United Against Iran Nuclear, says that there's a U.S. company, the American Steamship Company, that's providing it. What action have we taken against the American Steamship Company, right here on U.S. soil?
getting to your point, any U.S. person insurance provider, shipbroker, flagging authority, trader, anyone involved in the movement of Iranian oil has obligations and liabilities in our
I
jurisdiction.
understand that, we all do. So what have you done to hold them accountable?
On the specific entity that you asked about, I don't have an answer for you, and I'd be happy to follow up.
Beyond the pale, we have asked this question multiple times. You are Treasury. What other U.S. entities are providing insurance to Iranian Ghost Fleet ships?
None that I'm aware of.
All right, I'm going to hold you to that. Let's follow up then. Mr. Paley, I want to talk with you on, are you aware that Iran has a history of freeing up funds to provide assistance to proxies in the region for terrorist purposes?
Yes, we have long expressed our concern about Iran's support for.
And so when we talk about the humanitarian aid piece, let's talk about the Turk Bank. It's gone before U.S. review. We have seen that Iran has a long history of taking money intended to help the Iranian people and use it to fund terrorism. Would you agree with that?
We have long expressed our concerns about this, and that's why we have.
Tell me a tangible action that you've taken to clamp down on this.
Well, we have, first of all, worked very closely with our Treasury colleagues to ensure that strict due diligence.
Agreed. Has it
is for
stopped
all
any of the
these.
flow of oil? Because I've only seen increases.
In terms of the flow of oil, we also have a series of actions that we continue to roll out to address these issues. In addition to sanctions, we also have diplomatic outreach to a variety of different countries when we are aware that they are involved somehow.
Mr. Paley, I would
in
like a
Iran's
listing
exports.
of all the actions that have actually resulted in a reduction of oil flow out of Iran into terrorist groups. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield my time.
Gentleman's time has expired, and I will remind everyone on the committee that they are able to submit through the chair, questions in writing to our witnesses who are expected to respond in promptly. Now, finally, the long-awaited gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, the ranking member, is recognized for 5 minutes before we will then move to a separate 2-minute closing. So, gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes and then an additional 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I am going to read from an article that was printed on Tuesday, December 12, 2023, and ask that it be admitted in the record at a later time. My colleagues, this is not contained in the article, are concerned about fungibility, but it is selective fungibility. Not a lot of concern about what happened with money and cash in a previous administration. The article is styled, Qatar sent millions to Gaza for years with Israel's backing. Here's what we know about the controversial deal. I shall not read it in its entirety. I'll read excerpts. When did the Qatar payments start? In 2018, Qatar began making monthly payments to Gaza Strip. Some 15 million were sent to Gaza in cash-filled suitcases. There was some talk earlier about cash and how it is fungible. Well, the money was supposed to go into Gaza to help with payments to people who were working to help the persons who live in Gaza. But cash is supposed to be fungible. 15 million sent in cash-filled suitcases, delivered by the Qataris through Israeli territory after months of negotiation. And then it goes on to read, Israel approved the deal in a Security Cabinet meeting in August 2018 when Netanyahu was serving his previous tenure as prime minister. The U.S., that would be under the Trump administration I'm adding, was aware of the Qatari payments to Hamas. A former senior State Department official involved in the region told CNN on condition of anonymity due to the sensitivity of the matter. Goes on to read, Shlomo Abram, a former deputy to Israel's national security advisor, told the New York Times that an empowered Hamas helped Netanyahu avoid negotiating over a Palestinian state, saying the division of the Palestinians helped him make the case that he had no partner for peace in Palestine, thus avoiding pressure for peace talks that could lead to the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. You see, this money was sent to Hamas or to the persons in Gaza because the PA, the Palestinian Authority, was withholding making payments. And as a result, this money was to fill in this gap. Now, here's what Naftali Bennett said. A former Israeli prime minister told CNN Sunday that after years of flagging his concerns to Netanyahu when he was prime minister of education, this is Bennett, he stopped the suitcase transfers when he became prime minister in 2021. And here's an exact quote from him. I stopped the cash suitcases because I believe that horrendous mistake to allow Hamas to have all these suitcases full of cash that goes directly to reordering themselves against Israelis. This is the exact quote. Why would we feed them cash to kill us? Bennett asked. Continuing. Qatar denies those funds were intended for Hamas, saying they were meant as aid to salaries of workers in the besieged enclave. So friends, under the theory of fungibility given to us today by my colleagues, when you give money to workers that Hamas might normally have to use from its coffers, now you have aided Hamas. And the United States was aware of all of this under the Trump administration. I'm bringing this to our attention for many reasons, but my principal reason is this. I believe in a two-state solution. I believe in it so strongly that I have a resolution that I have filed indicating that we should have a state for the Palestinians. We have filed such a resolution to benefit the Israelis. I support Israel. I voted for more than $50 billion to support Israel. But I think it's time for us to have a Palestinian state, and I regret that Mr. Netanyahu has thwarted these efforts.
The gentleman's time has expired, and now we will put 2 minutes on the clock for you to have a closing statement.
But 1 minute. I think we agreed on one each.
Discretion of the chair, I'm giving you up to 2 minutes. How about that?
Well, but is that because you will have two as well?
It will be even.
Okay, well, I don't mind it being even, it's just that
It will be even. The gentleman is
Mr.
recognized
Chairman.
for 1 minute
All right,
for
then
a
I'll
closing
take a part of
statement.
my 1 minute to say this. We agreed on 1 minute. And if you want to change what we agreed to, I think you should at least respect me enough to say, let's change the agreement and make it 2. That was our agreement, 1 minute.
And which is why I'm saying 1 minute. I was attempting to be charitable to give the gentleman up to 2 minutes, but in respect for our handshake agreement, the gentleman will be recognized for 1 minute.
I greatly appreciate the chair honoring our handshake agreement. Friends, as you can see, these issues can become quite contentious. But here's where we are. Fungibility is something that was contemplated, I am sure, when these protocols, these rules, these laws were drafted. I don't know how you can contend that people can't process funds in this way. But here's the point. We still want to provide humanitarian assistance to people who need it. I support this humanitarian assistance. But what I don't support is empowering Hamas, as Mr. Netanyahu did, so that Hamas could be the perfect enemy. He could utilize Hamas because Hamas wants to destroy Israel and say, I can't negotiate for peace. We can't have a two-state solution because Hamas is not amenable to that kind of peace talk. That is what I'm opposed to, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired, and I will recognize myself for a 1 minute close. You have both said today that keeping money in Iraq was a benefit to Iran. So are we to assume that Iran did not support the transfer to Oman and other jurisdictions? I didn't think so. It's clear that the transfer was at the request of Iran to the Biden administration. Ms. Rosenberg said that she couldn't tell us or wouldn't tell us today in an open setting if there had been problems with the transactions out of Oman, the 2 transactions out of Oman that have been acknowledged. And the way I understand it, saying yes or no is not classified. But I guess if the answer is yes, you apparently didn't want to confirm that on the record. I expect a follow-up in a classified statement, in a statement setting, for all of us to understand why this is classified. Additionally, Ms. Rosenberg spoke at length about the controls of the Europeans, but the Europeans do not have control over money in Oman or Qatar. Mr. Paley repeatedly said to Ms. Garcia that there have not been any transactions. To be clear, Ms. Rosenberg said there have been 2 transactions with money in Oman and that there were problems, and she would not answer that. So what I think he meant to say is that there have not been any transactions yet using the money out of Qatar. And finally, we sent a very narrow document request on the waiver issue to Treasury that remains outstanding. Ms. Rosenberg, I expect that Treasury will produce an outstanding documents quickly. It's my duty to inform everybody that if you have additional questions all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit additional written questions for the witnesses to the chair, which will be forwarded to the witnesses for the response. I ask our witnesses to please respond as promptly as you are able, and this hearing is adjourned.